I think Sylvia and her colleagues, including Pablo and Carolina from LACNIC and Vimala, who's with us from AfriNIC, have put a lot of work into preparing this session, so I thank them for their preparations. I thank also, we've got a great panel today with us. I'll let them introduce themselves shortly, but I think it's a really good panel, and I really would encourage everybody in the room to participate and get engaged in the discussion we're just about to have. And the discussion we're going to have, the roundtable, again with your participation, is looking at the link between innovative business models for access provision, innovative device designs that contribute to access provision and local content generation in helping us connect the unconnected, which I think for many people is one of the key issues. Are we developing models and new ways to connect rather than the models that we've been using and tested for so long? So with that very brief introduction, I'm going to ask the panel, if I may start with Shida on my right, just to say briefly, to introduce themselves, their names and where they work. Thank you. Please go ahead. Shida, could you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Okay. Hello, my name is Sita Laksmi. I'm currently working at Diplo Foundation's Geneva Internet Platform, but in this space I will speak on, based on my experience working in transparency and accountability and technology for the last 15 years at my previous organization, HIVOS. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Carlos Rey Moreno. I'm currently working for the Association for Progressive Communications, but as Sita, I'm here representing Sense-Eleni Networks that together with Altermundi, we've been working on developing the Libre router that we'll be describing in our presentation later. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nico Chanis from Altermundi, and will also be presenting the Libre router experience.
Hi, I'm Mikey Gingold, Chief Strategy Officer for Air Jaldi, rural ISP based in India. We design, build, and operate wireless networks in rural areas in India. I'll be talking a little bit about it.
I'm Steve Song with the Network Startup Resource Center, and in this case I'll be channeling John Garrity of USAID on last mile business models. I hope I'll do him justice.
Thank you all very much. We're hoping to be joined by one other panelist. We'll see if he arrives, Yokai Banavi from Mozilla. Now, how we'd like to run this session is we're going to break it up into 3 sections, which would sort of planning as fire starters, if you like, to start some lively discussion. And the 3 sections we're going to break it up to are devices, where Nicholas and Carlos will speak about their work, contents and services, where Shetu will talk about her work, and access infrastructure, where Michael, Steve, and hopefully Yokai will talk as well. So I think we'll start, and if I could invite Nicholas to start the discussion around devices, and I'd noting the time, 5 minutes each. If you can do it in less than 5 minutes, that'd be great.
Carlos and I share the 5 minutes?
Yes, that'd be fine. Thank you.
Well, so it was a long road to get to the point of developing this specific device. We, people at Altermundi, started working with community networks around 15 years ago in Buenos Aires. At that time, we usually used regular computers on very big outdoor cases to create our network nodes. And we would add as many wireless boards as we needed, and we would use custom software on them, custom free software. But then, of course, technology evolved, and more versatile versions of the hardware started being available, or more accessible rather than versatile. And we started using off-the-shelf routers which we would modify mostly the software, but also sometimes a bit of hardware modifications, so we could solve the needs of the community network for which those routers were not designed. Now, of course, the router you buy in a shop is not designed for you to build a community network. It's designed for Wi-Fi in your house, and that's it. So we worked a lot in software development. Our main focus has been to develop software for communities in rural areas, small communities where the geek population tends to zero. And so it's important to have solutions that can be deployed easily, that can be deployed without people having to attend a month's course to learn a bit about networking. So we deployed a lot of different components of software that helped us achieve this goal, and we have been deploying such networks in Argentina for a while now, for some years, and in other places. But then we started to hit a wall with devices, with the devices we had available. A couple of years ago, the FCC had a new regulation that ended up with the decision of manufacturers to block the devices to third-party modifications. So you would buy a router that couldn't do mesh networking, and you couldn't modify it easily to solve the problem. And so at that time we said, well, this is actually killing the model of community networks we have been developing for so long. So we decided to build our own hardware, because the FCC regulates in the United States, right? So why should we in the global south be always affected by FCC regulation when it's obviously not always good for everyone? And so we decided to build a router that would not be limited by these impossibility of changing the software. And so we decided this router would be designed by the community networks for the community networks. And I think one of the most important features in this router is very simple. The router provides two 5 gigahertz radios for the mesh networking, and one 2.4 gigahertz radio for the clients. And this is really important because maybe, who here knows what or doesn't know what a mesh network is? Please raise your hands. Great. So mesh networks, the difference with the, sorry, I didn't see how many minutes?
About one.
Sorry. Okay, so the mesh networks are unstructured networks where every node has the same role as every other, instead of a hierarchical network. Yes, and for these networks, you need to have multiple radios for the operation to be performant. And there are no cheap devices, really cheap devices that you can have with this feature until this little piece of hardware that we have developed during this year. So I'll end up here and let Carlos tell the detail of Africa.
Thank you. So one of the nice things of the way of controlling, I mean, that is open hardware and we have control over the design, is that we've done it in a very modular way. So it comes with the possibility of extending it to increase the use of it, right? So, for instance, from Senseleni, there were two main important needs that we wanted to cover with this. That is the lack of electricity and the importance of voice. So for the lack of electricity, we have developed an add-on module that is a maximum power point tracker to make what Nico was saying, a plug-and-play hardware and software, so people without knowledge would be able to deploy this. The same we've done it for the solar kit, right? So it's a bracket where you can put the solar panel that is already with the design of the solar panel, the design of the batteries, that everything is automatized, and with very little tools you can actually power the Libre router as well. So that's one component that we've been working on. Another component that we've been working on is a Bluetooth LoRa module that plugs, and it can be used for IoT that other people might be interested, but for us it was to allow the possibility to turn on and turn off the router whenever it's not used. So the router would be able to turn off automatically, for instance at night if the communities are not using it, and then the Bluetooth allows you, so it's a little module that consumes very little power, so it's always on, and then with the Bluetooth you turn on the router, and it's through LoRa, it actually turns on the rest of the rest of the mesh, so you are saving power, and you can turn it on in case of an emergency. And then on the voice over IP side, voice communication is critical in rural areas, and is probably the killer app. So we've been working on developing a voice solution that allows the communities built on LibreMesh or contributing to that to have applications that are, again, plug and play for the communities to use it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for sticking to the time. I've neglected to mention we have one presenter online, and he's Ben Sevilla from Ateneo Manila University in the Philippines. So Ben's, I think if you can hear me and you're there, we'd like to invite you to give your remarks, please, on your work in the Philippines. Benz, if you can hear me, please go ahead. Everyone, you'll need a earpiece. Benz, if you can hear me, I think we need to pause. Can we improve? Benz, if you can hear me, we'll move on to the next speaker and come back to you. As you can see, we were just joined by two additional speakers, so I'd like to invite Jennifer and Jokai to briefly introduce themselves as well, please.
Hello? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Cheung. I work for an organization called .Asia organization, and I am the Director of Corporate Knowledge for them.
My name is Yochai Benavi. I'm the Senior Global Policy Manager at Mozilla.
Thanks very much. Okay, we're going to move straight on to the next section. As I mentioned earlier, it's content and services. And actually, Jennifer, if you could give your remarks now, 5 minutes, please.
I feel like this is very far away. But I can speak here and everyone can hear me? Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I do work for an organization called .Asia. .Asia is a registry, and it is the policy, we do the policy for the top-level domain .Asia. We are an organization that is a nonprofit, and so a lot of the works that we do is community-driven and community-related. So talking a little bit about local content, I'd like to really highlight two flagship initiatives that we do support very much, and then also mention 3 other newer supporting initiatives that we do support in the Asia-Pacific region. The first one I want to talk about, I did talk about before in IGF Guadalajara last year, is Agitora.Asia. So what is Agitora, and why are we supporting it? Agitora is an initiative that we're partnering with WWF, the World Wildlife Fund in Asia, and it is really to do with sustainable development and also bringing the plight of tigers to the forefront, and why people should actually know about it and care about it. And a lot of people don't know, the biggest threat that faces a lot of endangered species is actually the internet. Whether it is illegal wildlife online trade or poachers using your geotag locations. When you go on holiday, you think about taking snaps of these endangered species, and you don't know people actually use this data. So what we're doing with Agitora is we're trying to promote not only from the level of school children all the way up to I guess you and me and people beyond, people in businesses, to actually know that if you care about sustainable development, you need to care about the tigers as well. On agitora.asia, you'll see a lot of information to do with the actual species and where they're located. They're located in the 13 different tiger range countries in Asia. But also what you can actually do and initiatives you can actually help with. There's education modules that we've developed that we've also deployed in Hong Kong in over 500 local primary schools. The feedback we've gotten from the children as well as the parents have been very, very positive. So we're really very proud to help with this initiative because the tiger itself is a very much a symbol of Asia. You hear of people commenting on tiger economies. The tiger as the animal is very much a symbol of Asia. So that's agitora.asia. Not only is it something that we want to push very much for sustainable development, it's also part of our organization's figurehead. So he's a little bit of a mascot. So if you want to learn more about this initiative, I really do want to push for you guys to take a look at the booth upstairs to see a little bit more about agitora.asia. The second one I really wanted to talk about is really new for us. It's called techwomen.asia. So there's a lot of talk about women needing more women in this industry, needing more girls to be in STEM education, and this is a very worthwhile initiative that is being deployed in Central Asia. They're going to be spreading to South Asia and also the Pacific. So the networks are for techwomen.asia is growing in the region. It's really trying to play a very crucial role in empowering women in this field. The first deployment is in Afghanistan, and the mission really is to increase the number of women and girls enrolled in STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math, and also increase their prominence in business and civil society, and to give them access to information, education, collaboration with like-minded networks. I think for this, I think the very first techwomen.asia conference thank you very much for the time, happened earlier this year. So I do also encourage everyone to take a look at techwomen.asia. And lastly, I want to touch a little bit about the capacity building initiatives that we do. It is tied to local content as well. We do deploy a lot of youth ambassadors who do create a lot of apps for local Hong Kong youth, for them to actually learn about internet governance, which we're at the IGF talking about it right now. So I think maybe I'll conclude my remarks here and pass it back to Duncan.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Okay, Shita, you're next. Please tell us about the work at the Diplo Foundation.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I will talk on behalf of my previous organizations. What I would like to share with you is that the technology, content, and services, how they respond to the local needs is continuously shifting and being shaped. And it's not only in the matter of only one element that really make that definitions. So I would like to share with you based on the timeline. The first one was in 2006. Yeah, there is 3 stories I would like to mention. 2006, where it was my organization, HIVOS at that time, make a survey towards our partners, which most of them working in the issue of gender, human rights, and arts and culture, and HIV and AIDS. We were asking about what kind of technology that they are being used. At that time, we were also making a lot of sophisticated tools with a lot of technology organizations, in which after the survey, it reveals that most of our partners, especially in the South, is using the usual technology like emails, websites, and Yahoo Messenger. Then back to 6 years after, there was a cooperation between HIVOS, the organizations, and Manchester University in 2011, We want to learn how civil society organization using specifically internet and social media. So it's not technology, but specific internet and social media. It was very trending in Indonesia at that time. From the research, we found a lot of successful examples, but anecdotal, so not systemic changes on the use of internet and social media with these key highlights. The first highlight is that groups and communities strategically and politically use the internet and social media to multiply. If it's between groups, it will be via collaborations. If between groups and the beneficiary, it will be via engagement. The second is that we also found out that when online engagement meet with offline, the idea of creating a semi-regulated third sphere can provide opportunities to prepare the public for a full-blown engagement. The third one that we also would like to see, we reveal that it is so naive if we focus on the analysis on the technical aspect of the internet and social media as a success factor, because agencies, humans really matters. We can also see that the strategic use of the internet, like networking, cannot be seen just a direct output of using technology, but technology and its use is actually continuously shifting and being shaped, and the appropriation of the internet and social media in Indonesia civil society is more about the process rather than the outcome. So those are my second. The third one will be about the open data. This is the most recent issues that we are dealing in Indonesia and the Philippines that I know. Well, it took time for us, for the countries like Indonesia and the Philippines, to get the dividend or advantage of open data. Because in the beginning, I think we have learned that open data is not open an sich. So what we are preparing now is really have a reliable and good data within ourselves, and then after that being used, that data not necessarily open, and then if we are lucky, we can have an innovations. What I would like to share with you is actually from those three stories that I would like to mention is that this is a continuous process, yeah? The shaping of the content and services to responding to local needs are really a continuous process in which every element needs to be in the driver's seats, yeah? Sometimes technology, sometimes the content, sometimes the services, sometimes the agents. So it depends on what kind of issues that we would like to tackle. But this is not linear, and this is not just one-time processes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very good sort of overview of a whole range of different ideas around content and services. Now, before we get to the infrastructure part, gentlemen, just if we can, we'll try again with Benj in the Philippines. So, Benj, if you can hear me, please go ahead with your remarks. You have 5 minutes. Everyone would like to try their earpieces. Benz, I'm sorry, if you can hear me, you're really breaking up fairly badly, so I think we'll stop there. We might try one last time after the next series of presentations, but let's move on. Thanks, Benz. Let's move on to the infrastructure discussion, because we've got three very good sets of speakers here. So let me invite Michael from Jaldi to begin. Michael, you've got 5 minutes.
Good afternoon by now. Slightly different than the previous two sections. I understood our writ to be talking about innovative business models. So I'll try within 5 minutes. So just a few words about Jaldi. As I said in the introduction, we're an India-based company. We're an Indian company. We've been in existence for 10 years. We have networks in 8 Indian states, in the north, the east, the south, and center west of India. We cover about 30,000 square kilometers. We have about 230,000 clients in 3 segments. Fixed wireless, private clients, fixed wireless, business clients or institutional clients, and a very large chunk of public hotspots, which is an up-and-coming thing in India. These are all in rural areas. We do it partially on our own and partially in partnership with companies such as Facebook. So when I think about innovation or innovative business models, honestly, I don't really know what innovation in this context really means. I'm a great believer in being a mule. You get into a rural area, especially with an initiative such as building networks, becoming a rural ISP, it's really about persistence at the end of the day. Much more than about the new sexy idea, system, router, what have you. But we dabble with all of those. But if I am sort of put in a corner and asked to sort of reflect on this, a couple of pointers that I'd like to share. We're dealing with a situation in rural areas where the costs are higher than in an urban environment, and you need to serve a population that's more dispersed and with a lower ability to pay. So it's almost a non-starter unless you begin to think about reducing the costs and increasing the demand. So a few pointers there. First of all, recruit, train, and retain locally. We figured out very, very early on that we could not afford the technology college graduates from the cities or even the towns. So we recruit our people locally. We give them a 1-month course to start with, enroll them in the company, and then they move on and they have other courses coming on. And 90% of our 130 people workforce is recruited locally. We've trained many hundreds others. Second of all, fit the cost to the job. We need to think constantly. Is it an overkill or an underachievement? Is the router that I'm using a great machine but too expensive? Or is it a piece of junk that comes from God knows where, made of plastic and melts in the sun? The truth has to be somewhere in between. Source locally when possible. Much of our passive infrastructure is done by us or by local welders and people. The energy is sourced locally. Some of the smart chargers aren't, but you really need to be judicious about the use of expensive technology. Pay your people well. Although it's cheap to recruit locally, it's very expensive to lose people. So you've got to be extremely mindful about giving people not only a living salary, but a salary that encourages them to live with you and not to leave you. Scale. Scale is extremely important. I'm sometimes thinking about giving a course in technology archaeology where we just go across projects that have died and figure out what was the latest thing that failed. You need to grow. And we've been at it from day one, wanting to scale up. And you've got to do it. And you've got to grow, on the other hand, you've got to grow sensibly. Don't overreach. Don't step on your shoelaces. Make money. You've got to, we're dealing with a commodity. On a good day, I'd like to think that we're doing great things for the world, but we're selling a commodity. This is not an HIV/AIDS initiative. We're selling bandwidth. So we've got to be able to make a sustainable business model out of this. Stay ahead on innovation. We're not technology developers. I have great respect for technology developers. I deploy. We don't have time. We don't have money to do this. We need to deploy. And the last thing is you've got to keep on believing in it, because some days, are amazing. Other days are days of great desperation. But, persistence is important. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Michael. Just a small note to everyone. Can you just look at the microphones in front of you? If the red light is on your microphone, please turn it off, because that might be the interference we're getting with the external speaker. So thanks. Okay, Steve, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thanks. Briefly, just take a step back for a second in terms of when we think about connecting the rest of the world. It's important to recognize that the dominant narrative up until very recently has been mobile networks, that mobile networks, have performed a miracle in the networks the number of people that they have connected. But the reality is that mobile growth is slowing, and that the current mobile network models are not driving into sparsely populated rural areas. And that's why you see the people that you see on this panel is because innovation is required in business models, in technology, and in regulation in order to develop networks that will serve everybody. And I think my observations in studying the growth of these alternative models are three things, I think. One is that I think there's a creative tension, and that you'll actually see on this panel, between community-based and commercial approaches to access. And you'll see, almost two different narratives there coming from, for instance, strictly, we need smart business models that can affordably serve the poor, and it's all about how can we make it cheap enough for everyone to access the internet. And community-based models that are more about inclusion and more about thinking about, well, what does the internet mean to the communities that it connects? And I think we all know, certainly the last few years have shown us that the internet is not strictly a benign entity. We know it brings good, but it also brings dangers, as we heard from Jennifer Cheung about how it affects tigers. We know that social media platforms are used to sway public opinion, that the internet we need to be thinking about how to make a better internet, and community networks bring a lot of that thinking with them as they try and design an inclusive process for connecting people. At the same time, commercial networks also bring a discipline, as Michael was alluding to, in terms of how do you make this sustainable and long-term. And I think bringing those two initiatives into closer dialogue is very healthy. In terms of innovation and sustainability, I think there is, while technological innovation is essential, my reflection on visiting a number of networks recently in Kenya is that the most interesting innovations are people innovations. So while there are very interesting technologies being developed, the most interesting innovation I found in visiting a number of networks in Kenya was the agent acquisition model that one network had, in that how they had developed a very sophisticated model for actually finding new human talent to deploy these networks. And I think Air Jaldi has done similar things in terms of how they're building local capacity as part of their internal business model. I think actually I'll stop there, and I'll let Yochai.
Thanks, Steve. Right on time. And finally, well, I shouldn't say finally, but for the next speaker, Yochai, please, for your remarks.
Steve's always a hard act to follow. Most of you know Mozilla as the maker of Firefox, but what you might not know is that we, unlike some of our friends in industry, are owned by a nonprofit foundation. And so we are driven by our principles, first and foremost, before our profits. And one of those principles says that the internet is a global public resource that must be open and accessible to all. And so connecting the unconnected is very mission critical to us. We saw I think Steve commented about the sort of slowing of mobile growth around the world. And I think in that moment a few years ago, zero rating was sort of held out as this opportunity, this promise of sort of something that could help to, governments and regulators and other development stakeholders to accelerate the rate at which their people were connecting. And I think that we see in zero rating a lot of the same sort of anti-competition and anti-innovation concerns that we see with more traditional net neutrality violations. And so Mozilla said we can and must do better. We have to find new ways of providing affordable access to bring all of the internet to all people. And we launched an initiative called Equal Rating. Equal Rating solutions are free of discrimination, they're free of gatekeepers, and they're free of pay-to-play schemes. And most importantly, they provide people access to the full diversity of the open internet, not just some parts of it. They allow users to choose the content that they want based on the quality of that content and not on the commercial relationships of their service provider. And so, okay, if we can and must do better, how are we going to do that? We launched a global innovation challenge, the Equal Rating Innovation Challenge, that sought to catalyze new thinking in providing affordable access, and wrapped up earlier this year. And I'm pleased to be joined by two of the finalists of that challenge here on this panel. So I'll try and sort of give perhaps a little higher level rather than talking about Carlos and Steve's project specifically. We had 100 submissions from about 27 countries around the world. And I think within that saw indeed a lot of innovation, new models, new ways of thinking. And so for the rest of my remarks, I want to just sort of give some high-level overview of some of the different types of innovations that we saw in providing affordable access. I think we had about 5 categories. The first was around funding access. And so new ways of, if you don't want to pay for access, how can you change certain models, certain dynamics in order to bring capital into the system? And so whether that's looking at microfinancing, whether it's looking at advertising models that sort of connect local and hyper-local businesses with local users around sort of public Wi-Fi spots. We saw a lot of innovation, not surprisingly, around building access. Idea around a non-profit international fiber optic carrier, looking at innovative uses of TV white space, and looking at sort of other ways of sort of connecting local communities using sort of innovative new technologies that are proving more cost effective. I think we also saw around content delivery networks, I think a really interesting way of sort of changing who's paying for the internet, where you're charging sort of edge providers rather than users for access while reducing their costs. A third group around governing access, some of the community models that we've heard about. How do you sort of work with the community to build a network, especially when that community is coming online for the first time? A fourth category around teaching access, and how does sort of the digital literacy and sort of community level initiatives that helps people to understand what is the internet, what is data, what are apps, how does this all work, and integrating within that with sort of access innovations. And then finally, sort of around using access and ways to sort of help people to see the incentives and sort of create the sort of locally relevant content and sort of structures that sort of get folks to see why they should be coming online. And perhaps, I guess my time is up, but happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. And we're going to give Manila one last try. Thanks for your patience. Ben Sevilla from Ateneo University. His work on designing drones for humanitarian assistance. So if you'd like to put your earpieces on and keep your fingers crossed, let's see if Ben, can you go ahead and please speak up as loudly and clearly as you can? Thanks. Ben, I'm very sorry. I think we lost you completely there. So I think we'll move on to the next part of the discussion, and that's where I'd like to sort of spark some discussion amongst the panel. As you just heard, there's a very rich array of ideas and innovations amongst all the different activities that you've heard over the last few minutes. So one question I have to the panel, and I'll just throw it out there, is innovation. When you get something innovative, a new strategy, a new technology, where does it come from? Does it come from within your own team? Does it come from out in the community? When you see innovation, would someone say Jennifer, maybe starting with the Tiger, where did that come from? How do you pick up an innovative idea and how do you spot it?
I guess at .Asia, we're really fortunate to be working very closely with a lot of young people. We find a lot of inspiration coming from the younger generation, and Tigers this particular initiative did not I guess, spawn from them, but a lot of the other ones definitely did. For the Tiger initiative, we were actually approached because we do a lot of community works in and around Asia Pacific, and they thought that a lot of the works that we do seemed like a good fit. But definitely the Tiger initiative did have a very, very strong response in the younger generation and kids from all the way from primary school to secondary school, and they find it a very interesting way to learn about what the internet can do, both good and bad.
The rest of the panel, Michael, your hand's up. Where does your innovation come from?
A lot of it actually comes from our team and from users, and just maybe one or two interesting cases. So we are connecting one place called Harisal in Maharashtra. It's a very rural area, incidentally very close to a tiger reserve, where we actually have video surveillance of tigers. We can talk about that some other time. But it's one of the only places that we've worked in India where there is zero mobile coverage. Very, very rare in many places in India. So we've connected these people, put public hotspots, trying to make money out of it, actually making reasonably good money out of it, creating India's first digital village. Anyways, there's a hospital there with an ambulance. But how the hell do you call the ambulance? There's no cell coverage. So some of the guys figured out, they got the guy's phone number, got on WhatsApp, created their own little group, and they're calling the ambulance driver. Now this might not sound like a great innovation, but to me it's great because it's somebody looking at the situation, coming up with a solution that did not require somebody to write a piece of software. We're taking this idea, creating a very, very simple app that's going to be called Jaldi Aao. Aao in Hindi is come. It's going to have one red button and another green slip. So when the green is on, you're inside an Air Jaldi coverage area. If you press red, the ambulance driver will get your message and hopefully will come. A lot of the business models come from our team. People go in the field, we give them directives on smart ideas that we have about pricing or reaching out to clients or packaging things. They come back and say, no, boss, this doesn't work. We'll package it differently. Again, I don't want to take too much time, but some very, very interesting anecdotes there.
Okay, I think you had your hand up. Yes, please.
So I think there are two observations. One is there's no single silver bullet that's going to connect the unconnected. There's no one company, one organization that's going to do this. And two is I think that once we light up the fiber and build a tower, we still have to think about what are the sort of local solutions that actually help to bring people online, that speak to their sort of lived experience, as Michael was saying, and work in their community. For us, honestly, we tried to lock a bunch of engineers in an air-conditioned room in Mountain View to try and figure, what we were going to do in this space out. And it doesn't really work. We have, as a company, as an organization, as well as really embraced the notion of open innovation, about working with broad and diverse communities to come up with, surface new ideas that often have better fit for market, that bring in a greater sort of diversity of ideas and perspectives than we could possibly ever come up with ourselves. And I think open innovation as a methodology and sort of perspective is critical to sort of giving voice to a lot of those new ideas that really will help to sort of find those local solutions. And that's been very successful for us. We're now on our third open innovation challenge just in the access connectivity space.
Regarding the origin of innovation, I think that in our case there's a lot of interaction between what happens in the communities, what are the problems that the communities identify and how they share that with the more technically minded people in their communities and from the geekosphere, which is very connected globally in the mesh network movement, and that usually brings up interesting innovation, be it regarding software or hardware. And another thing regarding open innovation is that I think that agile development is one of the things that makes this interaction very, very fluent. The fact that usually in the open movement we deploy early, so we can have feedback very early and then reiterate over what we are innovating. And I think that's a rich thing that happens in the community networks movement.
Yes, Shita, please.
Yeah, talking about innovation, we had a lot of debates on what is innovation. Sometimes we end up with the creativity rather than saying innovation. But one thing we learned from all the processes is that if we have so many people with different skills and knowledge getting together and have one clear problem statement or issue, that might be something that is quite innovative, can come up. In Indonesia, that I know, there are a lot of initiatives coming from the government and from the civil society, from the private sectors, that try to really make a conversation between those stakeholders, those sectors, to really come up with an idea or innovative ideas that can really settle the issues. We have a lot of hackathon, which is not only one hackathon event, but it's actually a lot of process behind the hackathon and after the hackathon that makes things better.
Can I add to that the role of regulation? As we can see from our community, regulation is coming in many different forms. There seems to be the assumption that regulation can smother innovation. I wonder if anyone on the panel would, Steve, comment on that.
Particularly when it comes to telecommunications and access, we exist within a regulatory paradigm that was developed over 100 years ago. So telecommunications regulation was designed for national monolithic telecommunications network. And the fact is that the world has changed. The advent of low-cost, easy-to-use, easy-to-deploy technologies and the growth of wholesale generic national backhaul fiber networks means that deploying a network is within the reach of communities, of entrepreneurs, of municipalities, and yet they are restrained from doing that by the by regulatory frameworks that don't enable them. So I think one of the single biggest things we could do to enable access to the unserved is to create a new framework of regulation, not getting rid of the old one, but a new one that enables small operators.
Anyone else have a comment on the role of regulation or their experience with regulation and how it's impacted their work? Michael.
Try not to hog too much. Actually, you know, we're reality takers when it comes to regulation. We've been tempted many a times to try and advocate things, but you need to choose your battles and you need to choose your core competencies. Whatever, I mispronounced that. But I look at regulations as actually a challenge that one has to rise up to and live with. And if you look at India, this is one of the fastest changing regulatory spaces in the world. So you have on the one hand total annihilation of zero rating, free basic services all but blown out of the water. On the other hand, you have a new player that comes in riding roughshod over the policies, providing bandwidth for free for a whole year. I don't know if people know about a company called Reliance Jio. 1 year of data free and voice free. Try to survive in an environment like this as an ISP. One day I'll go to Harvard Business School and give a case study on it. But on the other hand, TV white spaces coming in, going out, E-band, V-band. So for us as an ISP, each one of these are challenges that we kind of roll with, and it forces us to innovate. It's a bit like competition in a way. Competition to me is not a threat, it's a chance to innovate. So, you know, I agree with Steve that one needs to have a better framework, but I don't see that it's coming anytime soon. And in the meantime, we've got to find ways to work with what we have.
Thanks. Carlos.
Actually, very interesting. Piggybacking on both, working with what we have is actually what we had to do in Senseleni, and that's why we've been trying to provide voice over IP over Wi-Fi. Neither Wi-Fi or voice over IP are, they can be used for providing voice and reduce the costs. But actually there is a technology that is meant to provide voice to people, and the handsets are there, that is GSM. the regulatory framework in South Africa is, and the way the licenses have been allocated, makes impossible to rural communities, despite the spectrum is not being used in rural areas, to make use of that GSM spectrum. Just to give you an example, if Saint Helene, where we are working, people spend 22% of their disposable income, monthly disposable income, in communications, in voice communications, sacrificing food, sacrificing in many things. If that spectrum that is held nationally and not used locally could be used by the communities, that 22% with the very same amount of minutes and calls and etc. would be 3%. So yes, you need to innovate, and you need to use whatever you have, and that's why we keep on innovating and keep on providing tools for allowing the people to communicate more affordably, but there are ways that regulation is disabling to do it better.
I think that's a good chance to open it up to the audience. And I think straight away we've got a question online. So let me start with that question, Vimala, but then get your questions ready. We'll be coming to the audience straight after this.
Yes, there's a question from Silvia Cardena. So it's to the speakers. How do the speakers suggest that the needed collaboration from all stakeholders can happen? What are the barriers for that collaboration to flourish? How do your organization find the funds and the time to work on collaborative projects?
A couple of easy questions there. Who'd like to... did you get those? Who would like to respond? Maybe the first question? Well, Vimala, could you just repeat the first question?
I'll just repeat those very easy questions.
The transcript is horrible.
Okay. So I want to ask, how do the speakers suggest that the needed collaboration from all stakeholders can happen?
How do you spark collaboration?
Okay.
The easiest one is to collaborate around something that everybody benefits from. It's the easiest one. And the challenge, again, if we take it to a rural setting, is can you do something that the government is interested in? Can you do something that the rural community finds useful? And can you do something that a big commercial player finds interesting? And if you've hit both of these, all of these three buttons and a couple more, you're on the right way. So, you know, it's about framing. It's about framing what you want to do.
So we start with in the area of transparency and accountability, we have this project called Making All Voices Count. That one of the key main outcome of that research is that in Indonesia in particular, if you would like to make a successful project in transparency and accountability, you have to have a political will and leadership from the government. So in my observations, how do we spark the collaboration if in the countries like Indonesia and the Philippines, where when we do introduce the open government back in 2011, that really sparks the collaborations. So there are some leaderships needed, but then when it comes to the detailed and how to do a better job or how to really do all the stakeholders together, then we have to really involve the others. But the leadership should come from them. But it's also has an issues of regulations as well, and because the innovation might not be that innovated if we have to work with so many people and especially with the government.
Steve, and can I ask, maybe you can have a go at the other part of the question, how do you fund collaboration, sorry?
How do you fund collaboration?
So I just want to build on the issue of transparency. I think one way to actually kickstart collaboration is to simply have more transparency in the telecommunications sector. So, for instance, Carlos was talking about gaining access to GSM spectrum. In the majority of countries, this is not public information. Who has been assigned spectrum, on what terms, for how many years, it's not public information, and it should be. And some countries are fantastic examples. Kenya, Nigeria, they do a great job of publishing that information, but they're in a tiny minority of countries that make detailed spectrum information public. Tower information, fiber networks. We should know where fiber networks are so that we can spot an opportunity to tap into them. All of this information is often treated as confidential information, whether for commercial purposes or for government purposes. There needs to be a movement towards that. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let someone else take the other part.
Thanks, Steve. So I'll open it up for questions. Let's do two at a time. So the gentleman at the back and the gentleman there. So 3 questions, and we'll take 2.
Thanks. Jonathan Zook from the Innovators Network Foundation. I work a lot on future of work issues, and I just came out of a future of work panel, and I'm reminded of the old adage that when all you have is a hammer, every problem becomes a nail, because there seems to be this notion, to your question of regulatory frameworks, that because we have a existing regulatory framework, we end up doing everything we can to classify new economy businesses and find a way to categorize them as old economy businesses or get them to change their practices to behave like old economy businesses to accommodate the regulatory framework in which they must exist. Obviously, it's a chance for innovation, but it feels wrong-headed that sometimes it might make sense to look from scratch about how to solve the same kinds of problems those frameworks were put in place to solve with a blank slate, because otherwise businesses are constantly modifying their business model either to fit regulations, to fit sources of funding, et cetera, and that seems like it's a disruptive force in economic development.
Hi, my name is Bernhard Heiden. I'm with the Copyfighters campaign that tries to engage with young people in Europe around the topic of copyright reform, which is actually quite pertinent. There's currently on the EU level such a thing going on. You can check out the campaign on copyfighters.eu, so I'm not going to go into detail with that. I'm just going to stay with a quick question. So content-wise, how does copyright systems in your regions of the planet affect your work, and have you been actively working on these issues? Because especially young people are very affected by content filtering systems and their inability to actually formulate their own positions on the internet towards big corporations that are trying to save their old business models and keep on not innovating.
I think in community networks there's a lot of work regarding local content, local services, and it's quite common to find that some initiative gets discarded from the beginning because there is a possibility that it will be targeted as a piracy hub. No? I think this is sort of a panoptic thing that is going on with copyright and content sharing, because at least when I talk with my community, maybe the community wouldn't mind if they are sharing copyrighted material from Hollywood or whatever. They would like to share their local production, no? And I think there is a niche that we need to explore much more, and we need to push for regulation in that direction. I always say that we have a World Internet Property Organization, and we don't have a World Access to Culture Organization. So I think we should try to have the WACO to discuss these issues, because it doesn't make sense to destroy innovation for the sake of copyright.
Sorry, anybody else on that?
think this is a really interesting point, especially when you're talking about innovation. I guess, is the mic on? A lot of young people are facing an uphill battle with, you want to create local content, you want to create content that's pertinent to your peers and to your target audience. I'm sure a lot of people in this room have heard of it. Agitora is actually on a Creative Commons license. So I think in that sense, there's a certain movement towards going to a different kind of licensing model or a more openly collaborative innovation model where your works can be used, derived, or remixed in ways that encourage further transformation and innovation of your works. So just a brief pointer on that. So.
Yes.
Identify yourself and then the question. Thanks.
Hello. Yes. Hi, this is Luis Martinez from Mexico. When we get into community networks, we start to look that people, let's say the organizations are gaining interest in community networks. Let's say in the current state, operators, they still feel that there is no market in these small communities because they think they are few and poor, so there is not a market of interest. Governments, they feel they are being covering the needs of many necessities, but these people are usually far away from the last mile plans. And international organizations as IITU, they're starting to get interest in community networks. So I would like to ask the panel, what do you think about the compliance of technical standards in community networks? People working in these, engineers and organizations, should enforce the compliance of technical standards, or still there is some period where the most important is to develop the engineering of the network and the social effect of the network rather than the compliance of full standards? Thanks.
Who'd like to respond? Yes, please. Nicholas.
I can talk about something that happens with our solutions is that we're used to working usually at the edge of development, and it's quite hard to get the hackers to standardize in ways that the standard bodies expect. We have been trying to push for some of this, and we are currently trying with some software routing software, also with the white spaces database, but it's quite difficult to make it match the open source gig community with the standardization processes. I think it would be good to standardize. We still haven't had much success, although there is, of course, some developments that are completely standardized.
Yeah, Steve.
Am I on? There. The only thing I would add to that is I think it depends on what standards, and it's very contextual. Some of you may have heard of Ono Purbo, who is one of the sort of pioneers of community access to Wi-Fi in Indonesia, and he broke all the rules in connecting schools and hospitals in unserved areas, and by breaking the rules, he was able to kind of normalize change. On the other hand, I mean, you get situations where wireless ISPs in crowded areas break the rules by turning the power up too high on their devices, and everybody suffers. You get a tragedy of the commons. So I think the answer is just that it's extremely contextual. Sometimes it's the right thing, but not always.
A good point.
Yes, I agree with that is contextual. But I sincerely believe that we engineers must set us a limit on how far we can get Yes, because we're making the internet, we're building internet from scratch. So that's the chance to start with the standards rather than from real scratch. Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, down the back. Thank you. Please, microphone, please, so the moderators. Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, okay. My name is Svetlana. I'm from Belarus, and I want to ask question to Altermundi company. Not company, I mean guys. So I know some guys from Altermundi, and that's very nice. So it's interesting for me how you develop your own Altermundi community. So I am from Belarus, and we have community of geeks. We call ourselves Phalanster community, and we work with different network issues. So it's interesting, how do you engage more people? How do you collaborate? That's it. Maybe a few words about this.
The mic is still on, sorry. Regarding Altermundi itself, we have been working a lot for many years on building communication among different community networks groups. So if you are working, we need to talk more. Maybe you've met Nico, the other Nico. One thing is to get good relations between the development community, which is quite well connected, and there are events where we all meet yearly, and different forums, etc., where we all participate, or lots of the geek community participate. But then it's more difficult to actually connect the community networks, like the people in the community. No, I think that is still more of a challenge for us, at least. No, we had a tornado, or almost tornado, yesterday where I live. Half the community is offline, and they are all talking among themselves. They have not started talking with all the rest of the community networks that are around them to try to solve the issue collectively. So that, for me, is still a challenge, that communities tend to naturally connect more with the rest of the communities around them.
Any other comments from the panel on that? I think one of the things that we find interesting, which I know is not a community of geeks, but is more the commercial operators, is APNIC, and I think the other registries support the network operator groups, the NOGs, around the region, and certainly in the Asia Pacific, in the developing economies in the region, by supporting and sponsoring network operator groups who come together, the engineers, and get to know each other and collaborate, is a great way to get the community. I know it's a slightly different model to what we're talking about here, but it's a great example from our point of view. In the Asia Pacific, with 56 economies, there's only 16 NOGs, from the very large, obviously, like in Japan or Australia, to very tiny ones in some of the Southeast Asian countries. So it's another example of how different communities can come together if you're not aware of the NOG community. But I also agree with the point that the development community, which is very active in this area and comes together and collaborates a lot, does not have, in some ways, a great awareness of our technical community. It always surprises me when I meet a development agency that, for example, has never heard of network operator groups. They have no awareness whatsoever. So I find that quite interesting as well. Yes, madam.
Sorry. I've got a question. My name is Anna. I'm a member of ICA, International Compliance Association. My question is I have got two questions. One is concerning regulation. When you are innovating, you are creating a new service, a new product that doesn't exist. So I guess judges, lawyers, they don't know what it is. And when you are developing, you have to consider that you have an ecology, ethics to respect, and you have as well an obsolescence of the previous technology that used to be used for that purpose or for that need. So how do you work with regulators? Do you have someone in your team? Do you work hand by hand with lawyers in your own structure to elevate those lawyers and create your own regulations, because you have to get inspired as well as innovating the product, innovating the rules as well. And little by little, when you grow up, you continue updating this, working with your lawyers, or you simply just develop and wait and see?
Who'd like to respond to that one? Yes, Carlos, please.
Well, lawyers are expensive, and we are struggling to make all this process sustainable, so it's difficult. On our case, it's not that we have a lawyer on our team, but there are some experts, some telecommunication lawyers that are pro bono facilitating what we do in the regulatory environment, both from operation and helping us, for instance, in this process of trying to acquire or open up the space for GSM spectrum for communities, but also in the licensing framework, also in the type approval. In the case of the Libre router, there is a certain regulations that need to be met for a device to operate in a given country. So all those processes are assisted by pro bono regulators, because actually, at least from the experience of Sense Eleni, meeting the regulatory framework opens a lot of doors as well. So it's true that we build a new paradigm and we build a new something that doesn't exist and needs to be regulated differently. I will go to that point now, but at the same time, to do it closely to what exists opens doors and open ears in the like trying to not be very disruptive in that sense, or trying to be disruptive but being careful on the language is also important to create that new space with the regulators. For instance, now, something that doesn't exist in South Africa, something that wasn't discussed about collaboration and about business models is the commons, and running the infrastructure as commons in a sense of is a win-win situation for all the stakeholders or all the ISPs and users in the network, but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. Doing or implementing the commons in the South African regulatory framework is not possible, and it's very difficult to actually do it. So we need to be creative and we are working with our lawyers to try to do it. So it's I guess, give and take process all the time. It's not easy. But yes, lawyers are critical.
Yes, Steve.
So innovation happens where it can. And if you look at the huge success of Wi-Fi, it is because it is the only portion of a vast amount of wireless spectrum which doesn't require a license. It's not unregulated, to come to Luis's point, but it is unlicensed, and that's why we see it in every single device in huge networks that we leap from Wi-Fi network to Wi-Fi network. But it's not enough. And in order to reach everyone, we need more than just Wi-Fi. And in order to do that, we need to change regulations to make more spectrum available. And in order to do that, we need lawyers. We need telecom lawyers for good. And there is this gigantic gap. Telecom lawyers, they all work for mobile operators or big companies. There is an incredible dearth of public interest lawyers working on telecom and regulatory policy. So this is something that there is a critical lack of to be able to actually move move things forward.
Thank you. Yeah, Michael, when I think
choose your partners wisely. One of the partners in Air Jaldi is actually a lawyer, so he's aligned.
Yes, and sorry, no, and then Shita, please.
I'll just add one anecdote. As a policy person, not a lawyer, I would say that you should talk to us too. I mean, I was talking to a member of our compliance team the other day, and as a relatively mature company, most of these decisions for us are approached in a very interdisciplinary way, right? Policy, legal, compliance, engineering, all coming together. But our compliance person was saying to me, well, let's see, how that law shakes out, how they start enforcing it in a year, and then we'll figure out what we're going to do. And I said, well, we could influence the law now before it's written. And so, I think that there are actually a lot of folks who are thinking about policy in this space. And so I think that to the Access projects, so sort of here and out in the audience and around the world, I think there are a lot of folks who are actually keen to collaborate on this point. And who are pushing for sort of more progressive telecom policy and regulation and can be allies here.
Shita, please.
I would like to actually ask also the panels here, if possible, related to that issues. Because in Indonesia, as Steve was mentioning about ONO, then having a Wi-Fi open in Indonesia, it's actually breaking the laws. And also I come also from the community radio stations that we have this law acknowledging the community radio stations since 2004, but until 2016 they don't have license, but they still broadcast. The key thing is the dialogue between the policymakers and the doers as well on the ground. May not be totally correct in terms of regulations and laws, but could survive. So I would like to ask you whether that also being an option related to the innovations that getting bigger and might not be totally correct in terms of regulation. How can we make that dialogue process as one of the policy making processes that might be able to give more open room for innovation? Thank you.
Just a rather more serious word about regulations, and I think we need to be extremely mindful of that. Regulations are made by interest groups, and one of the most important things is mapping those interest groups and understanding where they're coming from and where they're going to. Without getting into details, I would encourage people to look at things like TV white spaces and to see who's supporting it, who's against it, and why. WiMAX is a very interesting case in mind. Some of you might remember that technology. It wasn't a problematic technology. It was a technology that some people were against. So extremely important in regulations, not just fight to change the policy, but understanding who you're with and who is on the other side and why.
I think we've got time. Just a couple more.
I'm the only one?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I take advantage. If I would like to, because you're coming from different countries and you develop different products and services, if you could, each one of you, tell me one word that would mean an ideal condition to innovate. What do you need to innovate? What is essential for you?
I think that's a great question, and I'm going to make that the last question before we wrap up. And so, yes, the panel. One word from each of you on what's the most important thing for innovation. Is that your question? So maybe start with Jennifer and go down. If you were to pick one or two words, or one concept maybe.
Openness, I think, is really. Can I be heard? Is this on? Yeah. For us, it's openness.
Openness of whom? Sorry?
Openness of the communication channels, openness of ideas, openness in terms of transparency of the entire process. I think that's really important to innovation. Otherwise, it can be stifled.
I think multidiscipline between sectors, between stakeholders, that will be very important.
I would say is flexibility, like especially from the donor side of things, be flexible, because innovation is something new that you learn as you do it. So you need to stay flexible, not to stuck to something that you said at the beginning and you need to stuck to it.
I would say collaboration, at least for what we do.
I'm thinking of purpose. All too often we have wonderful answers looking for a good question. And when it comes to innovation, the thing that I'm always concerned about is what are you innovating for? And if it's aligned with what we're trying to do, then it's a good innovation.
Community. I think innovation comes from other people and being connected to other people.
I'd say diversity. I think both in terms of different perspectives and different lived experiences and sort of conditions that you're innovating for, as well as ensuring access to the full diversity of the open internet, which I think needs to continue to be the North Star for these access efforts, and that we work together to bring all of the internet to all people.
Thank you. I think there's a great example of the creativity of the panel. I'm sorry, did I cut you off?
Thank you very much.
A great example of the creativity of the panel. Not one single person has the same answer. And I think, again, a great example of what it takes to be innovative. I won't try to summarize the discussion of the last hour or so, except to say on a personal level, I found it really inspiring to hear all the different level or types of innovation and ideas and strategies and activities that each of the people on the panel have represented. And then a really fruitful discussion around what it takes to encourage it and how we're going to connect the next billion and how it's all going to work. So please join me in thanking our panel for today's contributions. I also want to ask you to thank the organisers of the panel, which is Silvia Cadena, who's not here, Carolina, and Ramala. So well, thank you all very much for attending. This brings to an end the session. Thank you for listening and thank you for participating. Sorry, excuse me. Actually, I just want to make a quick announcement. 1:30, the Seed Alliance Awards in room 26. You're all invited. Please come along to the Seed Alliance Awards in room 26 in about 10 minutes, please.